So my name is Nicholas Cullinan and I'm director of the National Portrait Gallery.
Okay, and I can't, I don't know if my camera seems to be on, but I can't see myself. Okay, my name is Elizabeth Peyton. I'm an artist, and I just want to say thank you to Filaf for having us here and including us in this year's event. Okay.
Hi, I'm Lucy Dahlsen, and I'm a former associate curator at the National Portrait Gallery, and I worked with Elizabeth and Nick and Jules on this exhibition at the Portrait Gallery.
Hello.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, it's okay. I'm Stéphane Corréard. I'm an art critic and curator here in France, and I am responsible for the Filaf for the contemporary art book selection. So I selected actually the book you made to be in Filaf.
Oh, thank you.
Hello.
Hello, Stéphane. Thank you very much for selecting the book that I designed. So my name is Jules Esteves. Should we begin?
Sure.
Sure.
You want me to begin? Shall I start?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So just talking a little bit about like the history of the exhibition, which is it was many years in the making. And so Elizabeth and I got to know each other about 7 years ago when I was living in New York. And at the time I was working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and working there on an exhibition which was called Unfinished, Thoughts Left Visible, which was a sort of history of unfinished works, but also about the idea of, you know, unfinished or finish and what that means to different artists in different eras. And in the exhibition, I included a work by Elizabeth, which was a finished version of an unfinished work by David, a portrait of Napoleon that's in the Louvre. And because of that, Elizabeth and I got to know each other, and we became friendly, and then I sat for Elizabeth. And so it was already kind of in my mind before I was appointed director of the National Portrait Gallery, now almost 6 years ago, that it would be great to do an exhibition with Elizabeth. And so when I was appointed and still in New York, Elizabeth and I began talking about the idea of doing an exhibition. And then a few months later, when I was in post and in London, Elizabeth came to visit and of course knew the gallery well, but we began really talking about this in earnest. One thing I should say before handing over to Elizabeth is that it wasn't obvious to do an exhibition at a portrait gallery with Elizabeth, because I don't think of her, and I've never thought of her as a portraitist per se. Obviously she's a fantastic painter and her paintings include people, but I wouldn't say that she sits squarely within the realm of portraiture. So it was a kind of interesting proposition, I think, for both the institution and hopefully for Elizabeth. But Elizabeth, I'll hand over to you at that point.
Okay. Well, it wasn't a very interesting proposition for me, because as much as I had visited the portrait gallery, it wasn't an obvious thing to me. And it took a little while after visiting till I really realized how at home I was in that institution. And what an opportunity to kind of, it's something that happens in my own work, a mix of times and people, and that's what exists in the portrait gallery as well. And when Nick suddenly had this idea, oh, why don't you mix in with the whole gallery? That's when the show, and definitely the tone of the whole book, was formed.
Yeah, should we talk about that a little bit, because that is quite specific to the book and also to the exhibition itself. And so normally, you know, the National Portrait Gallery in London, like most museums, we have two aspects, one of which is the permanent collection, and obviously our permanent collection focuses on British history from essentially the Tudors all the way through to now. And then the exhibition program focuses on portraiture as a genre, so any period, international, not just British, you know, and different mediums. And so Elizabeth obviously was really coming in terms of the exhibition program, but during the making of the exhibition, it seemed to be somehow kind of limiting what the exhibition could be, to have to ring fence it and confine it to our temporary galleries downstairs, and for her to have no dialogue with the permanent collection upstairs. So it seemed really exciting to think about doing something completely different, which is having a solo presentation downstairs, which was very important because I think we all wanted this. Well, I'll just speak for myself. I wanted this to be a survey of Elizabeth's works, and especially focusing on the works of the last decade or so. I didn't want it just to be a kind of project, mixed in with the permanent collection. But then it seemed interesting to have another part, which was Elizabeth's works in dialogue with, other periods. So you see here, the image that we're seeing is Elizabeth's portrait of Isa Genskin being hung next to the Van Dyck self-portrait, or Gwen John self-portraits, or Peter Lilly's self-portraits, and of course Elizabeth's own self-portraiture. And so that's when I think the exhibition became very specific, and because of that, as Elizabeth was saying, catalogue too, because it's about Elizabeth's works, but it's about Elizabeth's works in the context of time and history and portraiture.
Yeah, at the time of the exhibition, it's interesting, we're looking at this picture of the Prince Albert in Brixton, which is the first place I showed in London in the 90s, I guess. It was like 95. And in the beginning, when I was showing, I like to show in these spaces that people were in that didn't have, that were more accessible, and people were used to seeing pictures in these frames on the walls with other things, and I thought I could just slip my work in there, and I liked the idea that they could function that way. And in a way, the show, the book, and the work all function that way, and that they're all very aimed towards being accessible. There's a kind of collapse of high and low, and accessibility in them is a real purpose too. So when the show happened at the MPG, I said it was kind of just like the show at the Prince Albert, but a little step up.
I loved it. We're like a pub. That's the ultimate accolade.
Well, it's got such a different crowd at the MPG. It's not like Jules quoted me, it's not a capital A art space. So you have different expectations, and I think also you can enjoy the pictures in a different way. Yeah. And there's a kind of timelessness amongst the stories of the people, and the styles don't really matter at all, it seems like. And that's very freeing. I loved being in that context, and it's very much reflected in the book. Yeah.
The particular character of the gallery, and even the kind of physical character of the gallery, because of course now we've closed for a major refurbishment. So Elizabeth's exhibition was really actually the last exhibition that ran before we closed because of both COVID and this refurbishment. And in a way, it was about celebrating also the history of the MPG, its kind of character, its quirkiness. So that I think that was wonderful to kind of do something so specific and unique.
What's next? Jules, are you going to tell us about the book now?
Maybe. I was wondering if you might want to say something about the John Donne portrait, which featured in the downstairs part of the show, or Lucy, I don't know.
Well, I can just say something quickly-ish. The painting of John Donne, and John Donne is the metaphysical poet who was writing around 1600 or so. This painting I kept visiting over and over, even before the show came up, but I kept finding myself in front of this painting. And I think it was because he's, he seems so contemporary to me, his manner. He was also a mystery. Nobody knows who painted him. I thought, who could make such a great painting and his name is not attached to it? But the sitter, he was quite attached to it, and he even spoke about it in his will and who he wanted to have this painting of himself in the shadows that was made in his 20s that seemed to be inspired by a woman, maybe. And also, he provided the title of the show, Aire and Angels. from a poem of his. I mean, to me, I think when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about the air in my pictures, the space between things. And then also about the angels, about, you know, things that are a bit otherworldly that move you. So that's what I would like to say. So much got wrapped up in this painting of John Donne with the show. He was really the touchstone between the collection and then my work. So much so that I moved him downstairs into the show. And I felt like he sat just fine. I don't think there's much difference in the intent of making a picture like this and the kind of pictures I'm moved to make. So that's what I want to say about that.
I wondered if it might be, because I wondered if it might be nice to read a bit of the poem, because a big part of making was, and I highlighted it because a big part of making this exhibition in this book that I wanted to highlight was that it was very fluid. I've never worked quite on a project like this, and it was very much, it was really important in making both the book and the exhibition that the connections that we made between Elizabeth's work and the historic collection were not forced, because I think and very natural and intuitive, and then we could reflect on the kind of connections afterwards, and I hope that comes through in the book, because as Nick said, this was the first time that we had done this at the National Portrait Gallery, put kind of contemporary works upstairs. And for me, I remember Elizabeth telling me that the portrait of John Donne was one of her favourites in the collection, and then I think we all started reading John Donne poetry, or at least I did, and there were a few that stood out, and I just wanted to read a little bit of one of the poems that we read together in one of our meetings, Elizabeth, and that formed kind of the basis of how I could think about your work and how I could write about your work in the essay. So I did put a, oh goodness, okay, here we go. So this is an amazing poem called The Canonization, and it's a really punchy, I'm not an English literature scholar, so this is the way I interpret it, really punchy, witty, strong poem about the power and the purity of his love. And he says, "Who did the whole world's soul contract and drove into the glasses of your eyes, so made such mirrors and such spies, that they did all to you epitomize, countries, towns, courts, beg from above a pattern of your love." And to me, I read this poem and it was so interesting as a way into thinking about Elizabeth's work, because of exactly what she just described, as a way to think about art being something that is very rooted in this world, in the air, in the worldly, but to point beyond itself. The meaning is never fixed. It's transcendent of it. So I thought that might be a nice thing to share, because I think the poetry and the kind of gradual meetings really shaped the making of this book. And it was in no way a kind of literal description of what the juxtapositions were or what Elizabeth's work was doing. So it was quite an exciting project to work on.
I think we let the work do the work.
Yeah, exactly.
True.
No, I think that's not always the case in exhibitions. So that was really exciting to have the juxtapositions and then let the audience think about them in their own way and come to your paintings fresh.
Mm.
Yeah. Should we talk about the book itself now a bit more?
Yeah, I'm aware of time.
Yeah, Jules, do you want to talk a bit about?
Sure. This is one in process. One of the images from the process of making the book. When I think I had just ordered the works chronologically, basically in a sequence of pages, and sent it to Elizabeth at her request, and then she started like really engaging with the sequence, basically, of that section of the book, which is on uncoated paper, like you would have in a sort of picture section in a kind of like train station book with like images in the middle or something. and I think it was quite beautiful what she did with this exception to the exception to the sequence in the book where she kind of created this slow motion, I think, of characters just coming together basically through the pages. I don't know if I'm doing it justice by describing it like this, Elizabeth.
It was a dramatic interlude in the middle of the layout that I wasn't going to announce by saying it, but it was going chronologically, and then all of a sudden there's a succession of lovers getting closer together, and then there's a kiss, and then it's like I'm hoping there's a lot of feeling that comes after that kiss. But whenever I make a book, I always like to use it as an opportunity to make another work and to make another feeling that you could have in an individual work, but have it, use the book that way too, as a kind of way of building up drama and feeling, getting some feelings you wouldn't have otherwise of maybe love, things like that. So that's what happened in that section. But Jules, perhaps you could back up to just the initial approach you had to the book, because I think your initial going with Lucy into the archives, and you sent me back these pictures, just putting one picture on top of another. It just became the tone of the show and the book, I think.
Yeah. I think for me it was very much trying to kind of like find that balance between this grandeur, I guess, of the National Portrait Gallery being like a very the facade speaks for itself, and but also a very open place that just is freely accessible by the public, just a beloved place that just sees a lot of people through its gate, and just also a historical place, I guess, for the mass distribution of images. And looking at what the equivalent to that might be in books, essentially. So trying to find that sort of element of status, I suppose, which kind of like ended up being more or less the typography, which is this design inspired by the early Renaissance letter shapes, basically just when the humanist letter form kind of came into itself, and finding another typeface by the same designer, which I think shows a bit more of that inspiration, basically how that is all rooted in the hand, and trying to reconcile the kind of classic imperial Roman capitals with more of the handwriting tradition, and also how in this you have this very, I think, quite touching detail of metal cutting, basically, of just the actual craft of doing the letter. So that was one element of the thing, I guess, sort of grand thing of it, which kind of like had this connection also with a tiny church in Bologna from the 1490s, I think, which was the inspiration for the entrance block of the National Portrait Gallery, and as it happens was the birthplace of one of the Francesco Grifo, who basically invented the humanist letters, the kind of like gold standard, which is now known as Bembo for letter shapes. And I thought this was this quite like funny, or like rather just like a really clever font decision for that thing, which I then riffed off by choosing a similar font. And so basically, yeah, just trying to find that balance between the stately and the more democratic. So this is me very pleased with myself, and the banner with Dan Kier in front of the gallery with a Tesco bag, which is a affordable supermarket, on a drinks evening shortly after the opening. So yeah, basically just looking at books and how that was done. This is a cool book from the Third Republic in France, literature school book, but just showing images to illustrate a bit how the different periods were, and just looking at different ways of showing images. So this is basically just the age-old kind of like engraving or etching type thing. I like how crowded the page is, like unnecessarily a bit like these kind of like 19th century cabinet of curiosity type galleries. On the right-hand page, like, why would you need like two Gaulish looking soldiers on that page? Or just like photographic reproduction, there again, like this kind of like clutteredness on the page, which I thought was quite interesting. And just the translation of a work, so not showing the actual thing, just like redrawing it. This one was very, very influential. Sorry, I'm just going through like quite a lot of source material, but this one was really enlightening, I think, in the way the images ended up working in in the catalog, which is a book designed by Jan van Toorn, who's a Dutch designer from the 60s. So he designed this in the 60s, where his style was really coming into itself. And he was tasked with making a sort of, I think, a printers union kind of like show-offy book for Christmas about the museums in Holland, and chose to showcase the collection of all the museums throughout the country as one massive collection. You can see on the lower right, there's a page from the Taylor's Museum in Haarlem, which is one of the oldest in the country and probably the world as well, which I think all these kind of museums, and this one specifically, were kind of like at least partially being turned into like white cubes at the time. And I think this kind of like layout kind of like pays tribute to this like 19th century, or actually pre-19th century kind of like place for, I think like the founder like wanted it to be like contemporary art and science. So basically just like lots of stuff, like very dense hangs and things like this. And I thought this was just very beautifully translated in the book, and thought something like this might happen in the catalog for the NPG as well. The designer received like a phone call from a fellow designer, I think, after publishing that thing, basically just being told off for how informal and disrespectful he was to the art. And I thought this was maybe a nice kind of aim. This one I'm not sure if I get the time to get into, but basically how different papers can give texture and create light, basically, by just using slightly different papers. It's slightly different kinds of printing. And obviously just beautiful image essays. And this is, these are a couple images we exchanged that Elizabeth sent, with also an interest in reflection and what happens when that tells about like the environment of an image, with this kind of like sheen, the gloss, the transparency, the kind of like transparency in a sense, and how that could be brought into the catalog. There is some of this in her photograph of the John Donne painting, as it's shown in the catalog, where you can sort of see herself in the reflection, where you can see her in the reflection. You can see the exit sign, I think, in a corner. There's lots of nuance, and it tells a lot. And I think there's something that was quite a good aim in that. And trying to like translate this into the book, so make not something that would document the exhibition, also because it wasn't hung when the book was designed, but more something that existed alongside and would kind of like be some sort of equivalent to it. So these are little snapshots from the trip to the archive, which Lucy took me kindly to the library and the archive after taking Elizabeth and looking on the paper trail of the John Donne portrait. So basically this is an old like enhanced photograph, just like showing the writing that you have on the edges of the painting a bit more clearly.
This one that shows, it says called John Donne's Scotus. So it played into Elizabeth was saying, it was about the mystery around the portrait. We didn't know who it was by, and we didn't know who the portrait was of, because they thought it was of John Donne's Scotus. So that was quite fun.
And so basically that was me going through the library, just finding for anything that has some kind of like reflection on it, like whether relevant or not. And just like versions of works, like how like this kind of 80s or 70s kind of like slightly faded print, like a newspaper clipping, and how that ends up like maybe showing the work in question with I don't know, a bit more sense of how it actually is, like physically, or what time it's been through, maybe more accurately than just a very clean photograph of it. Obviously, like, this is, I think, from 1900 or 1901 catalog from the National Portrait Gallery, and how also the kind of like page layout just gives a sort of sense of how the hang could, or maybe like the kind of like density of it. I thought was quite nice and telling of how the gallery feels. Another thing in the file of the John Donne portrait was just its use on book covers, pocket books. I thought was really great in finding what works and what doesn't. I'm not going to pass judgment on these ones, but I think you can make up your mind. And sorry.
I love the tagline.
That is so good.
Yeah.
Aire and Angels.
That says it all. Well, and also, I think we're going to get to it, but it also provided one of the titles of the inside books, Illuminate My Darkness, O Lady, which is written in Latin on the face of the painting.
Yeah, that you can faintly see on the complete English poems cover.
Yeah.
Which is a spin on Illuminate My Darkness, O Lord. So.
These were all the possible covers.
Yeah.
Combinations.
Brute force testing, which these are some.
And titles.
And titles, yeah. All of these are the same, which was a previous one. And you can see, like, yeah, basically what makes a good cover, and the slow progression to the final title and the final cover. Which and yeah, one thing about the book, I think also the design of it is just the fact that well, it came. I mean, the previous book that Elizabeth had published was for a show that had, I think, a lot fewer works, maybe about 15, and I think I mean this show at the National Portrait Gallery had like about 50. If not more, and like spanning like basically her entire career. And so this was the book for 15 works, which is like 400 pages, massive. So yeah, it would have been difficult to outdo that. So I think there was this urge to make something that felt appropriate to the National Portrait Gallery as a very freely accessible place, something that was not too pretentious, but also just a practical consideration. And that's one of the things that led up to something that was a bit counterintuitive in making a small book, something that could almost register as a pocket book. I don't know if you get a clear sense of scale from the images, but it's pretty small. And basically just like making it with materials that were not particularly special, or just using like very gloss coated board that you could find in like any kind of like box. Just very pulpy cream paper that's more in the world of like novels, and also just having different small covers inside of the book. And I don't know how we're doing for time, but I thought this one was a brilliant example. I mean, like at least a big inspiration for it. It's a book by Mike Nelson for his 2011 Venice Biennale exhibition, which basically was a reinstall of a 2003 show in Istanbul, where he basically rebuilt the whole Istanbul building inside of the British Pavilion in Venice. And what he did with the catalogue was essentially binding a softcover book with a Turkish magazine cover inside of a hardback book that said British Pavilion. And I thought there was something just very beautiful and simple about it that, I don't know, could be developed into something else. And it turns out it's also the technique that's used by the NPG to just store its own like catalogs in the archive. And this is one of the images that made it into the catalog here. And also, like crucially, this is how also ephemera, like small leaflets and brochures, are bound together for the archive. And I thought this kind of device of just like several kind of like thin, glossy covers together in one book could serve to materialize and express like different ways of looking at the exhibition, because it wasn't going to be documented because it wasn't hung yet, but just like showing each of the authors, each of the contributors' approach to showing the exhibition, and each of them are separated by slightly thicker, glossy covers. So this is basically the foreword and next forward, and all the works are shown individually. So more like very descriptive approach to the show, so the material, and obviously very beautifully introduced, giving context to. Then Lucy's essay, which comes after these kind of like flexible, thin covers, and obviously another very beautiful way of showing the exhibition, of the exhibition, and then the kind of visual essay of different ways of showing by juxtaposition the aim of the hang, even though it wasn't literally descriptive of it. And an essay by Thomas Crowe. A bit more of a magazine-y treatment there.
Maybe
and
we can ask...
Nick's very beautiful essay about his experience as a sitter for Elizabeth.
So maybe we can ask to Stéphane Corréard why he has chosen the book. Stéphane, are you here?
Yeah, thank you, Marie. Thank you, everybody, for this beautiful and complete description of the project and the book. Almost all the questions I should have you already answered, so it's going to be very short. But first of all, you told us why you had this idea of a kind of pocketbook. Does it came directly at the beginning, and is it also related to the low culture, the pulp magazines and everything for you?
Jules?
Jules, yeah, perhaps?
Oh, I think it was. I think it's nice to show, for it to come across as something kind of like accessible and democratic, and try to transcend this in a sense. Like I think that might not be a very, fitting parallel for Elizabeth's work. I don't think, like working with materials that are, but I think there is something as well in the size of paintings, of Elizabeth's paintings, which are not very are generally like quite small sized, and I think there's something an economy with this. I think that's also like the way they're hung, which is generally like quite spacious around the works, and I think like really gives them focus. And I think at the National Portrait Gallery, it was like one of the rare occasions, as I understand it, that the work, even though the pictures from the pub say otherwise, where the work was kind of like hung like quite tight together and close to other things, and I thought it was something quite nice in just doing something a bit different for once.
And still, Jules, in her acknowledgements in the book, Elizabeth expressed her joy of being in a group show spanning 514 years. And I just would like to know if it was the same for you with the book, if you tried to make a book that could fit with 5 centuries history of book designing and making.
I don't think I don't think my historical knowledge is near complete enough to have this pretension. I think it's if it can be a translation of the exhibition, I think that's or of Elizabeth's work in its immediate surroundings. I think that's plenty.
Okay, so next question will be for Elizabeth then. Elizabeth, you're American, but you obviously have strong links to European culture and history. An example in the book and in the exhibition, the figures of both David Hockney and David Bowie seem quite important to you. Can you express something about it? Does it connect also for you with the difference between the American and European way of being an artist?
I don't know if I know so clearly the distinction between an American and British artist or European artist exactly. I think it might have to do with the sense of history, though, is where I feel more close. That there's a different sense of history and of time going on and being present. In the contemporary world, acknowledging, work from the past. Does that answer? Or?
Yeah, and why specifically David Hockney and David Bowie can be important characters for this link, or is it because the show was in London, you wanted to make a link with them?
No, not exactly. Though it seemed pretty important to me to show the pictures of David Bowie in London. Also, I feel like David Bowie saved my life in so many ways through his work. And I have such a strong feeling of him being a hero that I wanted these works to be present with other people, to be in the portrait gallery. I don't know, Nick, maybe you can tell us, but I think you had to be a person of distinction. The best this, or the best that, or the discoverer, or the king or the queen. And that's something that's always been in my work itself, not even having to show in the National Portrait Gallery. I was showing pictures of Princess Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, next to Sid Vicious, because I felt like this kind of nobility inside of people, people can be quite narrow about differences between people because of what they're wearing, or maybe one's a singer or something, but I think it's all what you do with your life. So the National Portrait Gallery really gave me a chance to highlight that extra, within the work, by showing these paintings of David Bowie and, say, Kurt Cobain with Queen Elizabeth I, or Jarvis Cocker was up in that room. It felt right. It felt so right having those British musicians being in the Tudor period, where men were so free to decorate themselves and be beautiful, and that didn't take away from any idea of masculinity. So
we had fun with that.
Yeah, we did. And it all felt pretty natural. We didn't really have to think much about it. It just kind of popped in there, and I thought looked right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was all based on intuition, and as Elizabeth was saying, I think one of the key juxtapositions was in the Tudor Gallery, where we put the portrait of Elizabeth's portrait of Kurt Cobain from 1995 with a portrait of Elizabeth I, without thinking about it too much. It wasn't kind of deliberate, or it was just intuitive. And I think a lot of the projects, the exhibition, and the catalogue followed the same kind of intuition.
The other thing is it wasn't always about the biography. Like, we had still lives, and it was very much what we talked about at the beginning about Elizabeth is sorry, you speak for yourself, but you're a painter, you're not necessarily a portraitist. Yeah. So it was kind of, it was exploring the works and letting the works speak rather than positioning them as portraits of these people. So so that was something that was really interesting, and I think that exercise helps you to think about how other portraits can be thought about like that, and stop thinking about this kind of narrow way of thinking about what a portrait is.
Yeah.
And in the paintings of one of the big feature in the paintings by that you make, Elizabeth, is to succeed in turning celebrity into intimacy. And in the exhibition and the book, it appears that you proceed exactly perhaps the same way with history. It seems very like now, no? Is it something like equivalent?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question and comment. Yeah, I mean, I just don't feel like these people are so far away really in what's going on inside of them. They might, be wearing different clothes. But also, it's not really my thought to think about celebrities, but I more think about artists. And artists are, instruments of human feeling, of conveying human feeling. And you have to make yourself pretty vulnerable to do that well. And I think that's what one of my focuses is on the subject and inside of the painting, how I approach them.
Thank you. And still in the acknowledgements in the book, you write about your early works in the National Portrait Gallery. I was surprised with the feeling of being home. And we also remember, and we saw that in the book, that your very first show was in an hotel room. So what does it say about your particular way of looking at exhibition spaces? Did you strongly appreciate this kind of context?
Oh, very much. Thank you. Yes, I very much appreciate it, because I do like my work to be able to exist in different places, and it brings out the more human content to it, that quite like in music, that your mother can like David Bowie and your children can like David Bowie. Like, there's a lot of crossover human stuff that can happen. I think also it allows my work to just be seen, instead of with a whole lot of stuff around it, like she's a contemporary artist who makes figurative paintings. I think you can more just receive the painting. And it's important to me that the pictures at first are quite accessible, because people know what people are and people like looking at people. But it's just a way in to a lot of other things, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, thanks. And I would like then to ask a question to Jules, because we understand in the book that medium, and we know that medium is very important in the work of Elizabeth Peyton. She used painting, watercolor, drawing, etching. How did you deal with that in the book, and also with photography?
I think it was just an attempt to find a variety of ways to show, I think, the variety of work that could be encountered, I think, on a visit to the National Portrait Gallery when the show was up, because you had to go through the entire collection. I think Nick said that it was a bit like an Easter egg hunt for like finding the works, and we made this like little guide, and you kind of like had to find the things. I think it was just finding something that showed the same, finding ways, graphic ways of evoking the same generosity, I guess, something that, which also the individual works very much have. Like, I mean, when you, there's such like, yeah, just like depth to the surface of the gesso and the oil paintings, for instance. Like, I mean, there's just like something that's very, very, very compelling, and it was like it does translate well with photography, but not always perfectly. And so it was trying to find ways of creating excitement, or like all the things with the reflection on glossy surfaces. I think is that in the photograph, or like rephotographing of things, which Elizabeth does a lot of anyway. I think is I don't know, just a way of creating that or translating or finding an equivalent, I think, to that very central, I think, experience of seeing the work.
Thanks. I have to say you did an amazing job with images in this book, and thank you very much. And one very particular and very strong thing, I guess, about this project and this book is the very close relationship we can feel between the curator and the artist. So I would like to ask a question also to Nicholas, because you wrote a beautiful and very touching text in the book about your experience as a sitter for the artist. So I just wanted you to tell us a little about this, and explain maybe how, together with the ongoing relationship you have with the work and the person of Elizabeth Peyton, how does it change your way of curating and writing about art?
Thanks so much. Well, I wasn't the curator of the exhibition. Lucy was the curator. I was the kind of like friendly uncle as director. But you know, a lot of the exhibitions, especially the exhibitions we do at the gallery with living artists, you know, I tend to be supportive of in some way, because it's really important to me. It's been important to me since I became director to kind of bring, you know, the best living artists into the gallery. And before, I think maybe that wasn't so much of a focus. And so this was very much really part of that, which is kind of just bringing in some air and some life to the gallery and to history. Obviously, as I said, with Elizabeth, we knew each other before I even began at the Portrait Gallery. So it kind of began there. And then the thing that was maybe a little bit different about this was, you know, that I happened to have sat for Elizabeth, and it seemed therefore interesting to think about maybe documenting that for the catalogue. Obviously, because we're a portrait gallery, so we're all about this relationship between artist and sitter. But, you know, doing something like that was kind of very different for me, and a bit kind of out of my comfort zone in a good way, I think. I think we all wanted to really, you know, try and do something quite special and hopefully innovative and intimate for this project, which kind of fits with Elizabeth's work. So that was kind of the function there. So it's not something that I've kind of done before or maybe would do again, but it felt completely right and comfortable and really special for this project.
Okay, thank you. So next question will be for Lucy then. Lucy, how do you think the book reflects your experience as a curator of the show?
Well, I think none of us think of this as an exhibition catalogue. that was really important at the beginning. And I think curating contemporary art is you're working with an artist. So, you know, Elizabeth has a real vision of how she wants her work to be seen, and that's really important to come across. In writing the essay for the book, I was really determined, or I think writing about contemporary art in general, it's not about explaining what's going on here or telling people what to think. It's something, it's writing my thoughts that might go alongside and point to something. And I think the whole book worked in that way. There's quite different viewpoints in there. And it's, I think the ephemera that Jules picked up in the archive and how he patched kind of things together worked with the kind of way that the text sort of pointed towards things and wasn't kind of too literal or descriptive. So, yeah, it was a brilliant experience. As I said before, it was very organic. It really, we didn't plan this as you would plan, say, a Picasso exhibition, because Elizabeth's here and she can come and hang it together. So it was a real joy to work on, and I think Jules did a brilliant job in the design. It was so exciting to see all the different ideas and different strands of the show be brought together in this catalogue. And I think, yeah, the thing that I would emphasize is the importance on not being literal with what to tell people to think about this. This was a really creative project and natural, and it was, I think, pointing at things rather than being didactic, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. I almost have no more questions, but perhaps Marie will have some. I just
wanted to add something.
Yeah, sure.
Just say that because the catalog was made to, be made before the hanging even started, it really dictated a lot of what happened in the show, actually, rather than the opposite way around.
Yeah, that's true.
It sort of pointed the way forward to how, because it wasn't like a properly curated show in that it was trying to cover every period, or Because I'm Still Alive. It just didn't have that tone. But the book really gave the direction towards the hanging.
That's very interesting, and that may be why it's so special. The book is so special. But I still have a small question for you, Elizabeth, because we don't often have, I think, the chance to get you in France, and it's a pity. We are very sad of it. Why don't you do more projects in France?
I would love to show there more.
Okay, so we have to find something, a special project for you that you feel home in France.
Okay, I love France.
So we have some question here in Perpignan, especially Bertrand Belin, one of the members of the jury, who would like to ask you something, Elizabeth, or maybe someone else.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for giving us the chance to hear you talking about this beautiful book. My question is about the feeling to have the book in my hands. You know, the experience of physical contact with it. There's a lot of information in that book. There's a lot of different materials, different kind of paper, typography, lots of information. It gives me the impression, when I have this book in my hand, to have some kind of mature fruit at the age of an explosion, like full of flavors and something who's gonna, you know, explode. And it's a good feeling to me. And my question is, what is there any relation? What is that something that you think about? And what could be the relation between the fact that portrait means to me some kind of interrogation about silence. People who are represented in the paintings are not making noise. There's a lot of silence in the images, but the book make a big noise to me. What do you think about it? Is there any something you thought about?
I want to say something about how the book feels. Just that I think we're all book lovers that were involved with making the book. And I know with Jules, immediately he was thinking about a book that you could have in your hands that would open easily and feel good. And I'm so grateful for that tone of the book, that it's a real pleasure to be with it. It's not, falling on your face or anything like that. Thank you very much for everything you said. I like how you felt it. I don't think the portraits are all silent. I think that of course paintings can't talk, but I think they have a lot of feeling in them. And then you put them all together, and I think the layout that I wanted to make was a particular emotional ride, in a way, within the book. So maybe that's something of what you're feeling of the explosion. I hope.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth.
So maybe to conclude, I will have just one more question for you, Elizabeth, and after an invitation. I would like to know, finally, how this experience, I'm talking about the exhibition and the book, has changed your approach of portraits. I know it's a large question, but
yeah, but in some ways, I must say, I feel like I was walking towards this show my whole life. Every foot forward went towards this experience. So it was like a culmination and an affirmation of what I had been devoting my life to, in a way, if you know what I mean. I think that it could work in this way, mixed in with all the other stuff, was a huge joy, and be enjoyed in different ways was a huge joy. It got me thinking a lot about portraiture and how, being there, I realized how much I wasn't a portraitist, actually. Because, I'm not hired, I can't really do that. Commissions, that's not my thing. And, I'm so interested in painting and all the layers of mental energy that go into a painting, that I'm even unconscious of. And that's not always the aim of the kind of paintings that are at the portrait gallery. I think it kind of put that forward even more in my mind. But it really just strengthened something for me. It was just a joy in every way, and a real culmination of so many things I had been going towards. And some I didn't even know till I got there.
Okay, and maybe to finish with Sébastien Planas, the founder of the festival, we would like to invite you next June for the 11th session to an exhibition in Perpignan. So if you agree, we will have time to think about it, but it's an open invitation.
Thank you. Are you asking me?
Yeah, asking you to exhibit in Perpignan.
Thank you. I'd love to come.
Oh, with pleasure. So we'll have the time to think about it after. But I don't know if you have another question, everyone. Otherwise, I think it's time to say goodbye.
Okay. Thank you so much for this.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you very much to you all, and congratulations again for your fantastic book and job. It's a real pleasure to see the book, read the book, and hear you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Jules, for making this presentation.